My children sold our family's legacy, the cabin my wife and I built, telling me it was a worthless relic. They cashed the check with triumphant smiles, blinded by their own greed. They thought they outsmarted their old man. But their hasty betrayal triggered a secret clause in a contract I wrote 3 decades ago, a clause that legally severed the cabin from the land and handed me, and me alone, the billion-dollar timber rights they never even knew existed. Before we dive into this intense story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. We'd also love to know where you're all tuning in from. Let us know in the comments. The phone call came on a Tuesday, the kind of gray, listless afternoon that clings to your bones. It was the anniversary of my wife Alina's passing, a day I typically spent in quiet solitude, surrounded by the ghosts of better times. I was sitting in my leather armchair, a lukewarm cup of tea forgotten on the coaster beside me, gazing at a framed photograph of her. In it, she's laughing, her hair caught in the mountain breeze, the half-finished frame of our cabin visible just behind her. We were so young then, filled with a belief that love and hard work could build anything, even a fortress against time itself. The sharp, insistent ring of my cell phone shattered the peace. I glanced at the screen. ETHAN. A complicated mix of love and weary frustration washed over me. I loved my son, of course I did, but our conversations lately had felt more like corporate check-ins than father-son chats. I let it ring twice more before swiping to answer, composing my voice into something warmer than I felt. Ethan, everything all right? Hey Dad, I'm good. Listen, I'm a bit pressed for time, so I'll get right to it, he began, his tone brisk and devoid of pleasantry. It was the voice he used for clients, the one that said time is money and you're on the clock. Olivia and I have made a decision. We're selling the cabin. The words landed in the quiet room with the force of a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. The cabin. It wasn't just wood and nails. It was a sanctuary, a library of memories. It was the last place I had truly felt Alina's presence, where the scent of pine and wood smoke could almost conjure her back to my side. You're what? I managed, my voice a hoarse whisper. Selling it, he repeated, a hint of impatience in his voice now. Look, Dad, let's be realistic. It's a money pit. The property taxes keep going up, the roof needs work, and it's a 3-hour drive. None of us use it anymore. It's just sitting there. None of us use it. The words were a casual erasure of my entire life. I used it. I went up there every autumn to watch the leaves turn the color of fire. I went up every spring to see the dogwoods bloom. It was my touchstone, my connection to his mother, to the man I used to be. It's a family legacy, Ethan, I said, trying to keep the tremor from my voice. Your grandfather cleared that land. Your mother and I built that place board by board. And that's great, Dad, really, he said, the condescension so thick I could taste it. But legacy doesn't pay the bills. I've run the numbers. We've got a solid offer from a developer. 400,000. We split it, 200 grand each. That's a down payment on a new condo for Liv, and it'll give my portfolio a serious boost. He spoke of it as if it were a stock, a line item on a spreadsheet to be liquidated for maximum gain. The ease with which he dismissed our history, our mother's memory, was breathtaking. He saw a depreciating asset. I saw the notched board in the kitchen doorway where we'd measured his and Olivia's height every summer. He saw a leaky roof. I saw the spot on the porch where his mother and I had danced under the stars on our 20th anniversary. Did you even discuss this with me? I asked, though I already knew the answer. This wasn't a discussion, it was a notification. We're telling you now, he said, his voice hardening. We're the legal owners, Dad. You deeded it to us 10 years ago. This is our call. Honestly, we're doing you a favor, getting this burden off your plate so you can relax. A burden. The place where I taught him to cast a line, where I'd held him after he'd scraped his knee, where we'd huddled by the fire telling ghost stories. That was a burden. The cruelty of it was a cold, sharp thing twisting in my gut. I felt a profound, bottomless sadness settle over me. It was the feeling of being rendered irrelevant in my own life, of being gently but firmly pushed toward the exit by my own children. I knew arguing was pointless. Their minds were made up. They had seen the dollar signs and the glow had blinded them to everything else. In their world of fast money and fleeting digital connections, a quiet place in the woods had no value. So I did the only thing I could. I played the part they had cast foe. Me, the aging, out-of-touch father who just didn't get it. I let out a long, theatrical sigh. "Well," I said, my voice heavy with feigned defeat, "if that's what you and your sister think is best." "It is, Dad. It's the smart move," Ethan said, relief flooding his tone. He'd gotten what he wanted with minimal friction. "Great. I'll have the agent send over some final papers for you to sign off on, just some formalities. Talk soon." He hung up before I could reply. I sat there, phone in my hand, the silence of the room pressing in on me. The photograph of Alina seemed to mock me, her joyful smile a relic from a world that no longer existed. They were selling her memory for portfolio boosts and condo down payments. They were paving over our past. A cold anger, hard and clear as ice, began to form beneath the surface of my grief. They saw me as a relic, a sentimental old fool to be managed. They had misjudged me. They had misjudged me profoundly. It wasn't the splintering of old wood that hurt. It was the splintering of my own family, orchestrated by my own children. And it was a wound that I knew with chilling certainty they would come to regret ever inflicting. After the call with Ethan ended, the quiet of my study became a physical presence. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the hollow, ringing silence that follows an explosion. I placed my phone on the desk as if it were contaminated, the vehicle of a poison that was now coursing through my veins. For a long while I just sat there, tracing the rim of the cold teacup, my mind a maelstrom of memories and raw, wounded pride. Perhaps Olivia would be different. Liv had always been the softer one, the artist, the dreamer. Ethan operated on logic and ambition, but Liv, she had her mother's heart. Or so I had believed. With a trembling hand, I picked up the phone and found her number. She answered on the second ring, her voice a bright, cheerful burst of energy that felt utterly alien to my current state. "Dad, hi, were you just talking to Ethan?" He called. "Yes," I said, my voice flat. "Isn't it great news?" she gushed, completely oblivious to my tone. "I was so worried you'd be, sentimental about it. But Ethan said you were totally on board. It's such a relief. Seriously, that place was giving me anxiety. The insurance, the upkeep, it's like a non-performing asset in our lives. Non-performing asset. The phrase, so sterile and corporate, coming from the girl who once spent an entire summer trying to catalog every wildflower on that land, was like a slap in the face. She was speaking her brother's language now, the dialect of spreadsheets and bottom lines. "I'm already looking at condos online, Dad," she continued, her voice buzzing with excitement. "There's this amazing place downtown with a rooftop terrace. I could finally host proper parties. My marketing agency is landing bigger clients, and I need a space that reflects that. This money is literally a life changer." I listened, my heart sinking with every enthusiastic word. She wasn't the voice of reason. She was the co-pilot, happily charting a course directly over our family's soul. There was no malice in her voice, which was somehow worse. It was a complete, unthinking, cheerful blindness to what she was destroying. She saw a stepping stone to a flashier life, and the fact that it was paved with her mother's memory didn't even register. "I see," I said, the words feeling like dust in my mouth. "I'm glad you're excited, Olivia." "Totally. Okay, gotta run, I'm in a meeting. Love you, bye." The line went dead. I was 2 for 2. My children were united in their quest to liquidate their past. The sense of betrayal was no longer a sharp pain but a deep, spreading ache. It felt as if they had taken the photo of Alina from my desk, declared the frame to be old-fashioned, and sold it for scrap, oblivious to the precious image it contained. I stood up and walked around the room, my hand trailing over the spines of law books that had been my life's work. real estate law, contract law, trusts, and estates. For 40 years, I had navigated the intricate, complex world of ownership and obligation. I had built defenses for my clients, ironclad structures designed to protect assets and legacies from external threats. I had never imagined I would need to build one to protect my own legacy from my own children. But I had. My steps led me to the large, fireproof safe hidden behind a false panel of bookshelves. I spun the combination lock. The familiar clicks a soothing rhythm in the oppressive quiet. The heavy door swung open, revealing neat stacks of files, deeds, and legal documents, the paper skeleton of my life. My hand went directly to a thick, leather-bound portfolio at the very back. The gold-embossed lettering on the spine was simple: the Caldwell Family Trust. I carried it back to my desk and laid it open. Inside, the pages were filled with my own precise, almost surgical handwriting and typed clauses from a time before computers dominated my profession. I had created this trust 30 years ago, shortly after Olivia was born. It was a difficult time. I'd seen a close friend, a brilliant surgeon, pass away suddenly, only to watch his children, who had been given everything, squander their inheritance within 5 years. They sold his home, his art, his practice, fighting each other over the scraps until nothing was left but bitterness. The experience had been a grim lesson. That night, I had sat down and drafted the framework for this trust, a legal fortress designed to preserve the heart of our family's assets, the ancestral land, for generations to come. I flipped through the pages, my fingers tracing the dense legal text. My children knew about the trust, of course, but only in the vaguest sense. They knew it was something Dad the lawyer had set up, a boring bit of estate planning they never bothered to understand. They were beneficiaries, but they had no control. I was the sole trustee. I stopped at a specific section and appended lease agreement. The paper was thick, aged to a pale cream. My eyes scanned the familiar clauses until they found the one I was looking for. Paragraph 7, subparagraph B, the reversionary clause. It was a beautiful piece of legal architecture, if I did say so myself. Elegant, simple, and absolutely unbreakable. A grim smile touched my lips. Ethan, the financial advisor, saw the world in numbers. Olivia, the marketing director, saw it in images and brands. They were both smart, successful in their chosen fields, but they were specialists. They had vision, but it was narrow. They looked at the cabin and saw an old building on a small plot of land. They had never once thought to ask about the thousands of acres of pristine, old-growth forest that surrounded it. They saw the single, faded tree. They had forgotten about the forest. I closed the portfolio, a cold, hard resolve solidifying in my chest. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my heart, but it was now overlaid with something else. A sense of purpose, a strategist's focus. They believed they were in control. They thought they were making a smart move. They had no idea that they were merely pawns, willingly walking into a trap I had set 3 decades ago. A trap designed not out of malice, but out of a desperate, parental need to protect them from their own worst impulses. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured lawn of my suburban home. It was a comfortable life, but my heart was in the wild, untamed land in the north. The land my children were so eager to discard. I whispered it to the empty room, a promise to my wife, to my father, to myself. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. To understand the depth of my children's miscalculation, you have to understand what the cabin and the land it sat on truly represented. It wasn't just a vacation home. It was the heart of our family, the physical manifestation of our story. My grandfather, a man with hands like leather and a spirit as rugged as the mountains he loved, acquired that land after the Great War. It was nearly 10,000 acres of untouched wilderness in northern Maine, land that the timber barons of the time had deemed too remote to be profitable. He didn't see it that way. He saw a sanctuary. He never harvested a single tree for profit. He built a small hunting shack and taught my father how to read the land, to understand its rhythms. When my father inherited it, he continued the tradition. And when it passed to me, he made me promise that I would be its steward, not its master. Men are temporary, Bernard, he told me, his voice raspy with age. The land is forever. Your job is to make sure it's still here for your children's children. Eleanor and I built our cabin on a small, 1-acre plot overlooking the lake, a stone's throw from the original shack. We did it ourselves, over 3 summers. I learned more about structural engineering from those months of sweat and splinters than I ever did in a classroom. Eleanor, an artist, chose every color, every fixture, planting wildflowers around the foundation until the cabin looked as if it had sprung from the earth itself. When Ethan and then Olivia were born, the cabin became their paradise. It was where they learned to swim, the water so cold it took their breath away. It was where I taught Ethan to identify the constellations, far from the city's light pollution. It was where Olivia would sit for hours on the porch with her mother, sketching the loons on the lake. After Eleanor passed, the cabin became my refuge. In the grain of the wooden walls, I could still feel the touch of her hand. In the scent of the wood smoke, I could still hear her laughter. I sacrificed a great deal to provide for them after she was gone. I was a partner at a prestigious law firm, a job that demanded 80-hour weeks. But I never missed a parent-teacher conference. I never missed a school play. I cooked them dinner every night, packing their lunches every morning. I funneled my grief into being the most dependable, present father I could possibly be. I put them through the best universities without them ever taking on $1 of debt. I thought I was giving them a foundation of love and security. Looking back, I fear I only gave them a sense of entitlement. The change was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. It began when they entered their respective professional worlds. Ethan was hired by a competitive investment firm, and suddenly, every conversation was about market trends, ROI, and capital gains. He started wearing suits that cost more than my first car, and looking at my comfortable, modest life with a kind of pitying condescension. He saw my refusal to chase higher risk, higher reward investments as a sign of weakness, of being stuck in the past. Olivia's transformation was different. She joined a trendy marketing agency and became immersed in a world of brands, optics, and social media influence. Her conversations became peppered with jargon about personal branding and curating a lifestyle. Our family's quiet, private history didn't fit the sleek, minimalist aesthetic she was building for herself. The cabin, with its rustic charm and lack of Wi-Fi, became vintage in a bad way. It was an embarrassment, a symbol of a past she was trying to outrun. The first major confrontation happened 2 years ago at Thanksgiving. We were all gathered in my dining room, the table groaning under the weight of a feast I'd spent 2 days preparing. Ethan, after a few glasses of expensive wine, had broached the subject. "Dad, we need to talk about the cabin," he'd said, wiping his mouth with a napkin. "It's time to be logical about it. It's an underutilized asset. We could sell it and invest the money. In 10 years, that capital could be worth triple what the property is." "It's not an asset, Ethan," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "It's our home." Olivia had chimed in, ever her brother's echo. "But Dad, he has a point. It's not practical. Think of the image. When I bring friends or clients up there, it's a bit rustic. It doesn't align with my brand." I remember staring at them, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. My brand. I wanted to shout. "Your brand was built on the foundation of this family, on the sacrifices your mother and I made." Instead, I had taken a deep breath. "The cabin is not for sale. It is your inheritance. Not just the building, but the land, the history. It is not to be sold. Not now, not ever. That is final." The silence that followed was heavy with resentment. Ethan had looked at me as if I were a foolish old king refusing to see that his kingdom was crumbling. Olivia had simply stared at her plate, her disappointment a palpable wave. They exchanged a look, a quick, furtive glance that I was not meant to see. In that moment, I realized I was no longer their father. I was an obstacle. I was the keeper of something they wanted, and I was in their way. They never brought it up again directly. Instead, they began a subtle campaign. They would talk about friends who had cashed out of family properties. They de-mentioned the rising costs of maintenance, the headache of it all. They were trying to wear me down to make me see their logic. And now they had simply decided to bypass me altogether. They had the deed to the cabin, a gift I had given them a decade ago with love and trust, believing they would honor its meaning. I had deeded them the structure and its immediate 1-acre parcel, never imagining they would treat it like a used car to be flipped for a quick profit. They had mistaken a gift of love for a transfer of power, and in their modern, transactional world, they simply couldn't see the difference. The days following the calls with my children were a study in duality. Outwardly, I maintained the facade of the defeated father. I answered their brief, functional texts with one-word replies. I signed the documents their real estate agent emailed over, papers that confirmed my acknowledgement of the sale, mere formalities that had no bearing on the trust, but were necessary to complete their illusion of control. Inwardly, however, I was no longer grieving. I was working. My sadness had crystallized into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. Bernard Caldwell, the sentimental father, had receded. Bernard Caldwell, the corporate lawyer, had taken his place. My home office, once a place of quiet retirement, became a command center. The first order of business was to reaffirm the legal integrity of my position. I spent an entire day rereading every line of the Caldwell family trust document. It was perfect. The language was precise, the clauses interlocking like the gears of a fine watch. The reversionary clause was the masterstroke. It explicitly stated that the 1-acre lease upon which the cabin structure sat was contingent on the property being held by a direct blood descendant of my father. The moment the deed was transferred to any third party, a person, a corporation, anyone, the lease was rendered null and void. The 1-acre parcel would immediately revert to the parent property, which was the thousands of acres held by the trust. Effectively, Ethan and Olivia were selling a building with no legal right to occupy the ground on which it stood. It was like selling a houseboat without a mooring permit. The buyer, a developer named Alastair Sterling according to the documents, was about to purchase a very expensive, very immobile pile of logs. My next call was to a man named Marcus Thorne, a private investigator I had used on occasion for sensitive corporate cases. Marcus was discreet, efficient, and utterly devoid of curiosity about the why of his assignments. "Marcus, it's Bernard Caldwell." "Mr. Caldwell, a pleasure. I trust you're enjoying your retirement." "Something like that," I said dryly. "I have a task for you, Marcus. I need surveillance on a property sale in northern Maine. I will forward you the address and the name of the buyer, Alastair Sterling. I need to know the exact moment the sale closes. I need a time-stamped confirmation of the deed transfer at the county recorder's office. I also want you to monitor the property itself. The moment Mr. Sterling or his employees set foot on the land as its new owner, I want to know." "Understood, Mr. Caldwell," Marcus said, his voice unchanging. "Consider it done." With the monitoring in place, I moved to the second, far larger piece of the puzzle, the timber. For years, I had been the silent custodian of one of the largest tracts of privately owned, old-growth forest in the state. I'd received dozens of unsolicited offers from logging companies, offers I had always politely declined. But I had maintained a cordial relationship with one man, Richard Harrison, the CEO of a multinational sustainable forestry corporation. Harrison was different. He wasn't a clear-cutter. He was a long-term planner who understood the value of selective, sustainable harvesting. I found his private number and dialed. "Harrison." "Richard, it's Bernard Caldwell." There was a pause, then a warm, booming laugh. "Bernard, to what do I owe the honor? Don't tell me you're finally ready to sell me that slice of heaven you've been hoarding." "Not selling, Richard. Never selling," I said. "But I may be in a position to discuss a long-term lease of the timber rights." The line went silent for a moment. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. A lease, not a sale, meant the land itself remained untouched, but the resources on it could be monetized. It was the perfect arrangement for someone like him. "Bernard," he said, his voice now serious and focused, "you have my undivided attention." "This is preliminary, of course," I said, choosing my words with a lawyer's precision. "But there are some internal family matters being settled. It's possible the land will become unencumbered for such a transaction in the near future. I would like your firm to prepare a formal valuation of the timber assets on the nearly 10,000 acres of the Caldwell Trust property. I want a comprehensive report, market value, sustainable yield projections, the works. And Richard, I need it to be discreet. Consider it locked in a vault," he said, the excitement evident in his voice. "Bernard, do you have any idea what you're sitting on? From our preliminary satellite surveys over the years, we're talking about a significant volume of prime oak, maple, and white pine, untouched for a century. The valuation won't be in the millions." "I'm aware," I said calmly. "Send me the report when it's ready." For the next week I was a ghost in my own life. I ate, I slept, I tended my garden, all on autopilot. My real consciousness was in the north, waiting. Then the emails began to arrive. First, a text from Ethan. "Closing is on Friday. Money should be in our accounts by Monday." Finally. I didn't reply. On Monday afternoon, I received a simple two-word email from Marcus Thorne. "It's done." Attached was a scanned, time-stamped copy of the deed, officially filed with the county. The name of the new owner was Alastair Sterling. The trap was sprung. A few hours later, a message from Olivia pinged on my phone. It was a picture of her, beaming, holding up a set of keys in front of a sleek, modern condo building. The caption read, "New beginnings. Thanks for everything, Dad." Smiling face with 3 hearts. My finger hovered over the photo of her smiling face, a face so much like her mother's. A wave of profound sadness washed over me, a final, grieving spasm for the relationship we once had. Then I deleted the message, stood up, and went to my closet to select a suit. The time for waiting was over. The time for the reckoning had begun. I let them enjoy their victory for 3 days. 3 days of what I imagined was feverish spending and self-congratulation. I pictured Ethan glued to his trading terminal, injecting his newfound capital into volatile stocks, feeling like a master of the universe. I pictured Olivia buying furniture, hiring decorators, and posting artfully staged photos of her new life, curating her brand with the proceeds of her betrayal. I needed them to feel secure. I needed them to be standing on the highest possible peak before I pulled the mountain out from under them. On Thursday, I sent them both a text. "I'd like to take you both out for dinner tonight to celebrate your successful venture. A new restaurant downtown, my treat. 7:30. The replies were almost instantaneous. Ethan, "Sounds good, see you then." Olivia, "Ooh, fancy, can't wait." They suspected nothing. Why would they? In their eyes, the transaction was complete, the old man had been placated, and the future was bright and shiny. I chose the restaurant carefully. It was an old-world place with dark wood, hushed tones, and waiters who moved with silent, ghostly efficiency. It was a place for serious conversations, a place where shouting would be a grave sin. It was the perfect stage. I arrived early and secured a quiet corner booth. When Ethan and Olivia arrived, they were glowing with success. Ethan wore a tailored blazer, his posture radiating a new level of smug confidence. Olivia was in a sharp, fashionable dress, her smile wide and carefree. They looked powerful, successful, and utterly oblivious. "Dad, this place is amazing," Olivia said, sliding into the booth. "Well, you're a downtown girl now," I said with a thin smile. "You should get used to it." The first part of the dinner was a performance. I played my role to perfection, asking about Ethan's investments and Olivia's new condo. I listened to them talk over each other, spinning tales of their brilliant futures. They were a duet of ambition, their words painting a world where I had no place. I ordered the most expensive bottle of wine on the menu, a gesture they took as my final seal of approval. "To new beginnings," Ethan said, raising his glass. To new beginnings, I echoed, my eyes meeting his over the rim of my glass. We finished our main courses. The waiter cleared the plates. It was time. As he poured the last of the wine, I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the table. So, I began, my voice calm and conversational. Tell me about the buyer, a Mr. Alastair Sterling, I believe. He must have been thrilled with the deal. He was, Ethan said, puffing out his chest slightly. He's a developer. Plans to build a couple more luxury cabins on the property, flip them for a huge profit. We got a great price, but he'll make a killing. I see, I said, nodding slowly. And during the sale, did you walk him through the details of the land lease agreement? Ethan and Olivia exchanged a confused look. The what? Olivia asked. The land lease, I repeated patiently. The agreement that governs the use of the 1-acre parcel the cabin sits on. The one that was attached as a rider to the deed you both signed when I gave you the cabin 10 years ago. Surely your lawyer pointed it out. Ethan's confident expression began to flicker. What are you talking about, Dad? There's no lease. We own the property. We sold it to him, free and clear. I let a small, sad smile touch my lips. No, Ethan, you didn't. You couldn't. You never owned the land. You only owned the cabin. I watched the color drain from their faces. The ambient chatter of the restaurant seemed to fade away, the world shrinking to the confines of our small booth. You own the logs, the windows, the roof, I continued, my voice still quiet, yet carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. The structure itself, that was my gift to you. But the land, the dirt, the trees, the waterfront, that land has been held by the Caldwell Family Trust for 30 years. You were merely leasing the 1 acre the cabin sits on from the trust. A lease, I might add, that contained a very specific, very important clause. Olivia's eyes were wide with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. A clause? What clause? This is insane. You're making this up. Am I? I reached into my suit jacket and pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. I slid it across the table. It was a copy of paragraph 7, subparagraph B. Your mother and I built that cabin to be a home for our family, for our descendants. The lease was designed to ensure that. It states quite clearly that the lease is valid only so long as the structure is owned by a direct descendant of the Caldwell line. The moment it is sold to a third party, the lease is terminated. Ethan snatched the paper, his hands trembling slightly as he read. I saw his eyes scan the text, his financial advisor's brain finally processing information that had nothing to do with stock prices. I saw the exact moment he understood. His face went slack, his mouth opening slightly as the I am. Placations crashed down on him. The lease is terminated, I said, finishing the thought for him. And the land, that 1-acre parcel, reverts immediately to the trust. So, congratulations, both of you. You successfully sold Mr. Sterling a $400,000 building with no legal right to be on the ground where it stands. I do hope you kept the receipts. Olivia stared at me, her face a mask of disbelief. No, she whispered. No, you can't have. Why would you do that? He's trying to trick us, Liv, Ethan hissed, his voice cracking. He looked at me, a desperate, cornered animal. This is some kind of sick game, a legal trick. You're trying to scare us. It's no trick, Ethan, I said, my voice hardening for the first time. It's contract law, something you've clearly forgotten the importance of. You made a deal. You just failed to read the fine print. The silence that fell was absolute. The smug victors of 10 minutes ago were gone, replaced by two terrified children who had just realized the game they were playing was far more complex than they had ever imagined. The first cracks in their perfect, new world had appeared, and I knew with utter certainty that the foundation was about to crumble. The drive home from the restaurant was, I imagine, a frantic and terrifying one for them. For me, it was quiet. I didn't feel triumphant, only a profound sense of melancholy. This was a mess of their own making, but they were still my children. I had set the trap, but they had walked into it with such arrogant certainty. My phone rang just as I was unlocking my front door. It was Ethan, I let it go to voicemail. He called again and again. Then came the texts, a frantic barrage of accusations and pleas. You have to call me back. This is a nightmare. Sterling's lawyer just called me. It seemed Mr. Sterling was a man of swift action. Marcus Thorne, my investigator, had sent me an update an hour earlier. A brand new top-of-the-line bulldozer had been delivered to the property that morning. Sterling's crew had started to clear a patch of trees near the lakefront to open up the view. They didn't get far. Within an hour, a local sheriff's deputy, accompanied by a lawyer from a firm I kept on retainer in Maine, had arrived. They served Sterling's foreman with a cease and desist order and a notice of trespassing on behalf of the Caldwell Family Trust. The bulldozer was now sitting silent, a yellow monument to Sterling's thwarted ambitions. Sterling, a man not accustomed to being told no, had immediately unleashed his legal team. His lawyer had, in turn, called Ethan, demanding to know why he had been sold a property that was apparently landlocked by a hostile trust. The word fraud had been used. The term material misrepresentation had been floated. The threat of a lawsuit, not just for the return of the $400,000 but for punitive damages, was now hanging over my children's heads like the blade of a guillotine. They showed up at my house the next evening. The confident, glowing power couple from the restaurant was gone. In their place stood two pale, shaken individuals who looked as if they hadn't slept. Olivia's eyes were red-rimmed from crying. Ethan's face was a tight mask of stress. They didn't wait for me to invite them in. They pushed past me into the foyer. "You have to fix this, Dad," Ethan began, his voice strained. "Sterling is going to sue us into oblivion. He wants his money back plus damages. We've already spent some of it." "Olivia put a non-refundable deposit on the condo," he continued, gesturing at his sister who just stared at the floor. "And I moved my share into a high-risk fund. It's tied up. We can't just give it back." I led them into the study and gestured for them to sit. I remained standing, a deliberate choice to maintain a position of authority. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to stew in the consequences of their actions. "Fix it," I finally said, my voice dangerously soft. "Why should I fix it? This was your smart move, your successful venture. You were the ones who were so certain, so logical. You ran the numbers. Did you factor in a multi-million-dollar fraud lawsuit?" "This isn't fair," Olivia burst out, tears welling in her eyes again. "It was a trap. You set us up." "I did not set you up," I replied, my voice as cold and hard as granite. "I set up a safety net 30 years ago to protect our family's legacy from greed and foolishness. I never imagined that greed and foolishness would come from my own children. You walked into this with your eyes wide open, so blinded by a few $100,000 that you couldn't be bothered to understand what you were really throwing away." I walked over to my desk and picked up a thick, bound report that had been delivered by courier that morning. It was from Richard Harrison's firm. I tossed it onto the coffee table in front of them. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. "You're worried, out $400,000, I asked. "You're panicked about Mr. Sterling's lawsuit. Perhaps you should be more concerned with what you actually lost." Ethan hesitantly reached for the report. The cover read, "Confidential Valuation Report, the Caldwell Trust Property." He opened it. I watched as his eyes scanned the executive summary. I saw his breath catch, his knuckles go white as he gripped the pages. Olivia leaned over, her eyes widening in disbelief. Page after page of satellite imagery, timber density analysis, species breakdown, and market rate valuations. The numbers grew with every page, from hundreds of thousands to millions to tens of millions. The final page contained the grand total, the estimated market value of a long-term lease on the timber rights. It was a staggering figure, a number so large it seemed unreal. Over $1 billion. This can't be real," Ethan stammered, looking up at me, his face ashen. "Oh, it's real," I said. "That is your birthright. That was the legacy your great-grandfather secured, that your grandfather protected, and that I have been the steward of my entire life. That was for you, for your children, and for their children. A foundation of absolute security forever. You just traded it for a condo and a bump in your portfolio. The full weight of their actions finally landed. It wasn't just about a lawsuit anymore. It was about the catastrophic scale of their misjudgment. They hadn't just sold an old cabin, they had thrown away a kingdom. They had traded generational wealth, a legacy of immense power and responsibility, for pocket money. Ethan dropped the report as if it had burned him. He leaned forward, his head in his hands, and for the first time since he was a small boy, I saw him truly break. A dry, racking sob escaped his lips. Olivia just sat there, frozen, a single tear tracing a path down her pale cheek, her carefully curated world shattered into a billion irreparable pieces. The air in the boardroom was thick with expensive, conditioned silence. We were in the main conference room of my old law firm, a place of immense power, with a wall of glass overlooking the city from 30 floors up. I had called this meeting, and every person in the room was here on my terms. At the head of the long, polished mahogany table, I sat, calm and composed. To my left sat Ethan and Olivia, looking small and broken, shadows of their former selves. Across from them sat a red-faced, furious Alastair Sterling and his equally grim-faced lawyer. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. It was a legal execution, and I was the one holding the axe. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice resonating with the familiar authority of the room. "I believe we can resolve this matter efficiently and with a minimum of protracted litigation, which I assure you, Mr. Sterling, would not be in your favor." Sterling's lawyer, a sharp man in a pinstripe suit, bristled. "Mr. Caldwell, your children sold my client a property under fraudulent pretenses. We have a clear case for—" I held up a hand and he stopped, surprised by the gesture's quiet command. "Let me be clear, counsel, there was no fraud. There was, however, a profound and unfortunate lack of due diligence on the part of both the sellers and the buyer. My children sold you precisely what they owned, a structure, a log cabin, nothing more." I nodded to my assistant, who was sitting discreetly in the corner. A large screen descended from the ceiling. With a click of a mouse, the first document appeared, a high-resolution scan of the deed, gifting the cabin to Ethan and Olivia 10 years prior. I pointed out the specific language defining the asset as the structure and all fixtures therein. Next, I projected the full land lease agreement. This lease, which was attached to the original deed, clearly outlines the terms of the land use. And here, I zoomed in on the reversionary clause, is the trigger. The sale to your client, Mr. Sterling, terminated this lease at 2:14 p.m. last Monday, to be precise. At that moment, the cabin your client purchased became a structure illegally occupying land owned by the Caldwell Family Trust. Sterling looked as if he were about to explode. "This is semantics, legal trickery." "It is the law," I stated flatly. "The foundation of every real estate transaction in this country. The trust is the legal owner of the land. Your client is trespassing. The bulldozer he placed on the property is grounds for further legal action, which I am prepared to take." I let that hang in the air for a moment before moving to the final phase. "However, I am a reasonable man. I have no desire to see your client financially ruined, nor do I wish this to drag through the courts. So, the trust is prepared to make an offer." I paused, looking directly at Sterling. "The Caldwell Trust will purchase the cabin structure from you for the exact price you paid for it, $400,000. Ours. We will also add $20,000 to cover your legal fees and other incidental costs. You will walk away whole, and this entire unfortunate episode will be behind you." Sterling's lawyer looked at him and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was a better deal than they could ever hope to get in court. Sterling, still fuming but pragmatic, knew it. "On one condition," I added. You will sign a non-disclosure agreement ensuring the details of this transaction and the nature of the Caldwell Trust's assets remain confidential." "Done," Sterling's lawyer said immediately. Now, I turned my gaze to my children. They had been watching this exchange like spectators at their own drowning. "This resolution, of course, requires capital," I said, my voice devoid of warmth. "Capital which the trust will provide. However, it will be structured as a loan to Mr. Sterling which will be repaid immediately." My assistant placed a laptop on the table in front of Ethan and swiveled it to face him. On the screen was a wire transfer authorization form. The recipient was Alastair Sterling. The amount was $400,000. "Ethan," I said, "you are a financial advisor. You understand this. You and Olivia will now authorize the transfer of the funds from your accounts to Mr. Sterling S. You will watch the exact amount you gained from this venture disappear." Ethan's hand trembled as he reached for the mouse. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. There was no mercy in mine. This was the lesson. This was the consequence. He clicked the button. Olivia, watching over his shoulder, let out a soft, choked sob. They watched the confirmation screen load, the digital representation of their grand ambition, their betrayal, their condo deposit vanishing into the ether. The money was gone. The grand victory they had celebrated just a week ago was reduced to a zero balance. It was in that moment of absolute, public, and humiliating loss that the final vestiges of Ethan's arrogance shattered. He pushed the laptop away and buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook with silent, racking sobs. The confident, ambitious son I knew was gone, replaced by a broken man confronting the catastrophic scale of his own greed. The climax wasn't a shout. It was a whimper. It was the devastating sound of consequence, finally and irrevocably arriving. The paperwork was signed. The NDAs were executed. Alastair Sterling and his lawyer left the boardroom without a backwards glance, eager to put the whole debacle behind them. My assistant quietly packed up the laptop and the projector, leaving me alone with my two children in the cavernous, silent room. The city sprawled out below the window, indifferent. For a long time, nobody spoke. Ethan's sobs had subsided into a series of shuddering breaths. Olivia stared blankly at the polished table, her reflection a pale, distorted mask. Finally, I stood up. "Come on," I said, my voice softer now. "Let's go." I didn't take them home. I drove us all north, a long, silent 3-hour drive back to the source of it all, back to the cabin. When we arrived, the air was crisp and cool, smelling of pine and damp earth. Sterling's bulldozer was gone. The only sign of the recent turmoil was a small patch of freshly turned soil near the lake, a raw scar on the otherwise pristine landscape. We walked onto the porch. I sat in the old rocking chair that had been my father's. Ethan and Olivia remained standing, looking like strangers in a place that should have been their home. "I'm sorry, Dad," Ethan whispered, his voice hoarse. "I am so sorry." "Sorry for what specifically?" I asked, not to be cruel, but because I needed to know if he understood. "Are you sorry you got caught, or are you sorry for what you did?" He looked out at the lake, the late afternoon sun turning its surface to molten gold. "I'm sorry for everything, for not listening, for thinking I knew better, for seeing this place," he swept his arm out, "as a number instead of this. I saw Mom's memory as an obstacle to my success. I don't know how you can ever forgive me." "Your mother would be heartbroken," I said, the words heavy with truth. "Not because of the money, she never cared about that. She would be heartbroken to see her children treat her legacy and each other with such carelessness." I turned to Olivia, who was hugging herself, shivering despite the mild air. "And you, Olivia, what about your brand? Does this fit the image you're trying to build?" She flinched as if struck. "No," she said, her voice barely audible. "My brand it's nothing. It's fake. This is the only real thing I had, and I tried to sell it." I let them stand with that realization, with the weight of their shallow ambitions collapsing around them. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. The quiet power of the land, the silent judgment of the trees their great-grandfather had protected, was condemnation enough. After a long while I spoke. Gain, the trust is secure. This morning I signed a 50-year sustainable harvesting lease with Richard Harrison's company. The trust, your legacy, is now one of the most well-funded private conservation trusts in the country. It will protect this land for centuries. They both looked at me, their eyes wide. I have amended the trust documents, I continued. You are still beneficiaries. You will not be destitute, but you will have no direct access to the capital, not for a very long time. I saw a flicker of the old panic in their eyes, but it vanished quickly, replaced by a weary resignation. Instead, I said, I have established a foundation. Its mission will be to oversee the Trust's philanthropic activities, funding conservation efforts, providing scholarships for forestry and environmental science students, and maintaining this land. I am appointing you both to its board. Your inheritance will no longer be a handout. It will be a job. You will attend quarterly meetings. You will review proposals. You will learn about stewardship, about responsibility, about the difference between having wealth and creating value. You will earn your legacy dollar by doing good in the world. Perhaps one day you will be qualified to run it. That will be up to you.